Sanbonani, good evening, Dumalanga, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Kumalo. It's episode 171 of the Private Property Podcast, and we're quite excited. It is December. We're feeling very festive. You're probably tuning into us across our social media platforms, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. Welcome. And if you're a first-time viewer, where have you been? We've certainly been around for 170 episodes already. So you certainly have quite a lot of catching up to do on some of the great content that we have brought on your screens. And talking about the great content on your screens, we also have other shows here on Private Property across our social media platforms. And that's, of course, the First Time Home Buyers Show that you can watch every single Wednesday at 7:45 with SD Clarkson, where she takes you through some of the things that you can anticipate when you buy your first home, and also speaks to various people who share their experiences of buying that first home. We help you navigate that first purchase. We know how anxiety-inducing it can be, and we want to make sure that you have a smooth journey as much as possible. And we also have the farming podcast that played earlier on this afternoon, and it comes to your screens every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock. That is with Umbali Mogo, and that's such a great show if you've got great green fingers or exploring going into agriculture. I know a lot of us have certainly become, home farmers with, growing our own herb garden and spinach and tomatoes, especially during this lockdown. Well, if you want to explore that a bit more, perhaps go at it, at a slightly more commercial level, then you certainly want to make sure that you tune into the farming podcast. And we never leave you alone over the weekend, because we also bring you the Developers Show with Chad, where we profile some of the best estates that the country has on offer. And one of the shows that we're certainly very excited about is a special web series that comes to your screen every day this week, except tomorrow, because it's a public holiday. And that is Building Stronger Homes with PPC. That's going to be coming up shortly at 8 p.m. So that's something that you can look forward to. If you watched yesterday's episode, do let me know how that was. How did you find it? I really enjoyed having the conversation with the various experts talking cement. I love cement. I kind of have a big nerdy moment every time I think about cement and what it does, and even the process of making cement. So that's certainly a show that you can look forward to. It's a special web series that we're running here on Private Property. So do make sure that you tune in at 8 p.m. It promises to be very exciting. And on all things exciting, because it is a festive season and we are in a very giving mood. We are, of course, running a competition on our social media platforms where you stand a chance of walking away with up to 100,000 rands in cash prizes. And that 100,000 rand is split across different competitions, different awards on our social media platforms. And the very big one, where you have to be watching the Private Property Podcast every day, is, of course, questions for the champions. And on questions for the champions, what you essentially have to do is get 4 friends or family members, make sure that you form a team, give your team a name, and then you have to watch the Private Property Podcast. It's actually that simple. What we're going to be doing at the end of the show is we're going to ask questions based on yesterday's episode. So every single time we'll ask questions based on the previous day's episodes, and the team that answers the questions correctly first stands a chance of walking away with 1,500 rand. The big thing, all team members have to be present and watching the Private Property Podcast. All of you have to raise your hand saying, listen, we're here. We're members of hashtag Team Pirates, or whatever your team essentially is. So you all have to be watching us. And we announce the winners the following day. And this is to make sure that we just verify that all team members were, in fact, watching the show live. All of you did, in fact, make yourselves, be seen that you're watching. And then, of course, that you answered in time. So do check out the competition details down here below. We're very excited. There's quite a lot of money to give away. And later on in December, because we want to end the year off on a bang, you're also going to stand a chance of walking away with 15,000 rands. That is for the winning team, where we'll ask 10 questions and the winning team will walk away with 15,000 rands. And the second runner-up, or the first runner-ups, are going to walk away with 10,000 rands. So you want to make sure that that you get your friends and family to be tuning in to the Private Property Podcast so you can participate. Listen attentively. We love talking property. So all you have to do is just listen attentively. And I promise you, the questions are not going to be that hard. I mean, it's December. I know we've had a rough year. So the team and I are making sure that the questions aren't too difficult. And talking about things being difficult, this is something that we're exploring this evening. I know it's something that so many of us sometimes struggle with. And this is, everything you need to know about community schemes. I know that we talk about community schemes so much here on the Private Property Podcast. And that's because so many of us are slowly moving in terms of living in community schemes, whether you're renting in one or you're certainly buying in one. And with so many of us just not being familiar with how community schemes work, there's so much work that needs to be done in us just better understanding what it means to live in a community schemes, what we can and cannot do, and just almost readjusting to life in a community scheme. I always joke about how it took me so long to adjust to living, in an apartment with basically strangers, and it's still quite a shock to my system. And I think it probably took me over 2 years to just get familiar with, I can park my car and then pass somebody I don't know, but we live in the same yard. So those are some of the things that we're going to be exploring this evening. And I'm joined by Leigh-Anne Harrison, who is the portfolio manager at Pam Golding Property Management Services. Leigh-Anne, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Zama. Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
It's only a pleasure, Leigh-Anne. Community schemes are so contentious. There's always so much conflict. And sometimes it can just be such a headache. And even as I was saying earlier, I think it also just takes a bit of a mind shift because so many of us are just not used to it. When you grew up, let's say, whether you grew up in a township or in a suburb with your parents or, in a rural area, we didn't have community schemes. Everybody kind of lived in their own house. But now I have to adjust to this new way of living amongst each other. Perhaps tell us one of the most important things we need to bear in mind when it comes to living in a community scheme. Before we even look at when you're buying, what you should and shouldn't do, just living on a community scheme, what's the one important thing that we should always bear in mind?
Thanks, Zama. So I think you touched on it briefly. When moving or buying into a community scheme, you must remember it's not a freestanding home. A community scheme essentially is a scheme in terms of where there's a shared use of and responsibility for the parts of land and buildings. You are governed by conduct and management rules, or in the case of a homeowners association, by a constitution. Also, you could be governed by, you're part of a master property association or a property owners association. So it's always good to remember that this is not a normal suburb where you've got this one house next to the other and you can do as you please. You have to always consider that there are rules to follow. And before doing anything, check those rules first. I think that's one of the most important things you want us to consider or think about.
So I think one of the big things that I certainly want us to get across this evening is to help people who are either potentially going to be buying into a community scheme in the new year, or viewers who perhaps are going to be renting in a community scheme in the new year. But let's start perhaps with the buyers. A lot of people want to take advantage of the historically low interest rates and are probably buying a community scheme because of the many advantages that one essentially is able to get from living in one. In the event where you're in the market and you're viewing a property that's in a community scheme, what are some of the important things that you almost need to be aware of and ask your estate agent about?
So yes, when buying into a community scheme, there are many considerations that you must look at. Speak to your agent, your transferring attorney, the seller, whoever you can before you sign any offer to purchase. Look at, you can send a list to your agent of what you require, the rules, if it's a body corporate, the constitution, if it's a homeowners association. And I've sort of gone through a few items. I've made a list of a few items that you should take into consideration. The biggest ones that are always contentious, pets and short-term letting. So obviously in a freestanding home, you can have as many pets as you want, cats, dogs, birds, whatever you please. but a lot of times the rules state that they may not be permitted, or if they are, there's a height restriction, or there's a restriction on how many pets you can have. In body corporates, like the one that I stay in, pets aren't permitted. So we actually have dogs next to us in the complex. And I always wonder how it happened that they got them. But most likely what happened was someone moved in, they didn't know, but they can't just get rid of the dogs. It's always an issue. Same with short-term letting. A few years back, this became a massive issue, and it still today is an issue. Certain body corporates or HOAs don't allow it whatsoever for many reasons. The agents don't let you know that that's not permitted. You move in, you buy it as an investment, and the next thing you can't advertise on any short-term letting platform. And that creates a problem when this is the purpose for purchasing. Another consideration is the cost. And like we mentioned, you buy a community scheme and there's a bond to pay for, like with any property. But along with that, there comes your levies you have to pay for the day-to-day running of the body corporate. So you have your levies to fund that. You've got levies for exclusive use of a parking bay, a garage, a patio, a balcony. And there's also a CSOS levy, which came into operation towards the end of 2016. A lot of owners, when they come on board as an owner in a community scheme, those are the first questions they ask, what's this levy? What's this for? Why must you pay for this? A lot of the times, no one lets them know. And not because they didn't ask, they didn't know to ask. I don't know what I don't know. So those are very much the bigger items. There are a few more I'd like to touch on, but happy to be guided by you.
And I actually want us to look at some of the smaller ones, because I think the big ones, we speak about, and I know some of the viewers have managed to, ask estate agents about it when they were looking at buying, because we've had them say, look, I didn't even know about that. Pets is always such a big one. I live in a complex where you can have a cat, but you can't have dogs. Which for me is fantastic, because then we're not going to have, the noise from the dogs. And I think with short-term letting, I've certainly seen a lot of owners complain with that one, because one of the primary reasons why they bought into that particular community scheme was to put their property up on Airbnb, and then for them to find out that actually you can't do that because they don't want strangers, in the estate, and new people all the time. Sometimes it's loud, rowdy parties. So instead they just decided, look, rather not have short-term letting. What are some of the, we'll say, slightly smaller things that we probably don't quite think about, but we should actually be very aware of?
There's two that I want to touch on, and it's mostly financial, because it does. Financial aspects, money makes the world go round, and this is exactly what happens at body corporates. You don't realize the levy you are paying, and when you get your first levy statement, you get a bit of a shock. So before even thinking about it, and you found a unit at a complex that you really, really like, it's got a lovely view, it's a lovely apartment, two things I always think about is special levies and insolvency of the complex. So a lot of the times we raise special levies for projects, or if there isn't enough money to fund anything in the body corporate. So usually an owner should ask the seller, or a buyer should ask a seller, has there been special levies in the last 12, 24 months? Is there plans to have a special levy? And this ties in with the solvency of the body corporate or HOA. A lot of potential buyers request a copy of the last audited financial statements. And that can show you what's the current financial status, and if they are indeed solvent. How much were the expenses the previous year, what their collection of levies are, and at the end of the financial year, how much money they have left, how much liquid cash have they got left to cover any items. Should there be a massive burst pipe on the common property and the entire paving has to be replaced, or they want to upgrade the security cameras or the electric fencing if, say, it breaks. So always look at the solvency, because it will affect you. If, say, for instance, they aren't that solvent, or there's not a lot of money, in 12 months' time, they may have to raise a special levy to cover even their day-to-day expenses. Also, they may need it, look at the maintenance of a body corporate. How much do they spend? How much have they spent? and how much they spent. So look over a period of the past 24 months. If they didn't spend a lot, then there might be a possibility they're going to spend money. If they haven't got money, they've got to raise it somewhere. So it's good to ask the agent what has been the financial case in the last 12 to 24 months. That's very important that owners don't actually ask that. I've seen it.
And you know, I think that's probably one of the mistakes that I made early on in my property journey, that when I bought the first, couple of properties, that also wasn't a question that I thought to ask. And I think in some of the transactions was fortunate enough that it didn't, affect my investment in any way. But unfortunately, in other instances, it did affect my investment, where you buy into a particular community scheme, and then only realize that, look, there's quite a lot that needs work. And so you almost need to take a decision about whether or not you want to stay and be part of that work being done because you think it's going to be worth it, or you just don't want to be a part of it. So being able to just know that that's potentially something that could happen is such a big thing. And I think oftentimes we don't quite realize it, but it really is one of those things that we need to always be aware of.
Yes.
We're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, I certainly want to hear from viewers at home some of the mistakes that you found yourself making when you bought into a community scheme, and what were the questions you asked or didn't ask, and did the questions that you didn't ask come to bite you months, maybe, or even years later? Do share your experience with us down here below. And something to also look forward to later on the show, we're going to be kickstarting, of course, the questions for the Legends competition, and that for the Champions competition. And that's something that you can look forward to. We're going to be asking questions based on yesterday's episode. So if you watched yesterday's episode, of course you did, when we were talking with Michelle Dickens, the MD of TPN Credit Bureau. Those are the questions that we're going to be asked. So in the event where you didn't watch, well, you're going to have to be tuned in. You're certainly going to have to try and find out from yesterday's episode what some of the potential answers are, which is probably going to be impossible because you're watching this episode, meaning the big thing is to be watching us live, because that's how you and, of course, your team of 5 can stand a chance of walking away with 1,500 Rand in cash that we're going to be paying out at the end of the week in the event that you win. We're going to go for a quick break, and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 171 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. If you've just joined us, we're talking all things community schemes, and we're looking at, things that you should certainly be aware of in the event where you're looking at buying a new property into the new year, that is in a community scheme. And if you're a tenant looking to rent in a community scheme, then we've also got a few tips up our sleeves that we'd like to share with you at home. But before we get to that one, we are, of course, running a great competition across our social media platforms, and a really big one right here on the Private Property Podcast. And that one, of course, we want you to ask 4 of your friends or family members to form a team of 5 in order to participate. Give yourself a great name, whatever name it is, and make sure that every time we come on live here on the Private Property Podcast, you come on with your team members and indicate down here below. We always love getting some love from you. So do make sure that you make your presence known, and also then watch out for the questions at the end of the show. And those questions are going to be based on the previous day's episode. So we give you enough time to kind of digest and, be sure that you kind of, what's going on. And then we're going to be going through questions that are not going to be that hard. I think we've actually been quite lenient and try to make it as easy as possible. And of course, the team that gets the 5 questions correct first is the team that's going to walk away with that 1,500 cash prize. Look at me, I'm talking about numbers so much that it's even slipping up how much money it is. But one of the other big things, because I love talking about money, is that then at the end of the month, we're going to be giving away 15,000 rands to the team that's going to be able to accurately answer the top 10 questions that we're going to be asking. So do make sure that you hop on our forms. We've already shared all the competition rules and details. Make sure you get your friends and family to join your team. Give yourselves a great name. Hop onto the live and show some love, but also, of course, participate in the competition so you can walk away with that money. We love giving away money. We know how easily we make it for you to be able to win that money. So do make sure that you don't miss this opportunity, because we are in a very festive and giving spirit. Now to get to our conversation, of course, I'm speaking to Leigh-Anne Harrison, who's a portfolio manager at Pam Golding Property Management Services. And to go to your questions and comments on our social media page, we've got one from one of the top fan gang members on Facebook, Umatashingange, who asks, in a newly formed body corporate, how do you determine the levy and set up the system?
Very good question and very valid question. Whenever I look at preparing a budget for a scheme that's already been established for a few years, it's easier to do a budget because you have figures to work from for the previous year. With a new development, there are no figures. You don't know how much it's going to cost in a year's time to fix electric fence or to fix the gate. So we try really do our best when we are preparing the budget and determining the levies to work on schemes that are similar. And just to get an idea, you'll know when a scheme is established and sectionalized that there are certain already determined expenses. Security, gardening, if you're going to have an employee that does maintenance on site, or a building manager, if there are any other projects lined up, or if there is any painting to be done. So, if I take painting for an example of a body corporate, it's usually every 5 to 10 years. That's almost established. If I look at maintenance, we're not certain when a pipe is going to burst or a gate's going to go and you'll have to replace it. But generally, we look at what we can determine now based on whatever contracts we've entered into, and we just base it off of what's a similar scheme that we manage or work on. So that's sort of the considerations that we look at.
Leigh-Anne, I mentioned earlier that we've been speaking a lot to potential buyers who are looking at buying in the new year. Let's look at renters who are going to potentially be renting in a community scheme. What should renters be aware of when it comes to renting in a community scheme?
Yeah, I've got a few points. The biggest one, again, I think, is parking bays and garages. Now, in a bigger scheme or where there's more common property, there may be more parking garages or parking bays. And another item to look at is visitor bays. So if it's a scheme of 100 units, most likely each unit will have a parking bay or garage. Now, depending on how big the common area is, there may not be enough visitor bays. So when you have your parents visiting or a friend, where will they park? Something to consider. Again, pets, big thing to consider. Are they permitted? Always speak to your landlord before you move in. You may have a pet and you move in and then you can't have the pet. So that's always something massive to look at. And then just the rules in terms of noise. If you are generally a sociable person and you like to have people over for a braai or dinners, it's always good to think of, remain cognizant of your neighbors. look at the positioning of the apartment. Are you close to everybody else? Is the balcony or patio where you're going to have your party or dinner close to other neighbors? Look at how noise could travel. Same with if you're a smoker, where you can smoke. It's not always permitted on the common property, but most likely in your apartment, that's something to take into consideration. And then also insurance. I know this is more for buyers, but I know geysers are generally covered in terms of insurance. However, look at the excess payable, if there is any excess payable for a geyser or any other claim. If you have a geyser claim, what the excess is, so that when a claim pops up, you'll have to pay that. It's not for the body corporate or HOA to pay. Another item that I just remembered, if you're living as a tenant, have a look at the rules, what the fining system is. If an owner is fined, generally they will pass a fine on to the tenant. So if you've paid a deposit or 1 month you pay more rent than that you're meant to because there's a fine, and it could be a small amount or it could be a big amount, but if there's a continuous breach of the rules, the owner may pass a fine on to you and make you pay it. So that's something to look at as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and if I actually think about, managing or dealing with tenants, sometimes I find that owners don't do a great job of sharing the rules of the estate or complex or the building with the tenant, and the tenant only finds out retrospectively or after they've committed that particular offense. Oftentimes, a landlord, especially perhaps if it's a DIY landlord, will have the lease agreement in place with the various rules, but lease agreement won't necessarily include all the rules, obviously, of the complex or the estate. Mm-hmm. So you almost need to actually just share those rules in their entirety, and perhaps even have a sign that they agree to abide by these rules. In the event where they don't, then there's going to be the penalty. Share with them what the penalty fee is. Mm-hmm. Then in their lease agreement, you can have a clause that says that that's the addendum, and they've stipulated what the potential costs are going to be, because that's also a way that oftentimes the landlord and their tenant tends to butt heads quite a bit, because you didn't know that you couldn't do certain things. I think the big ones we all know about, noise, ending at 10 or whatever the time period is. But some of the smaller ones, you're probably not as aware of them. And it does actually become quite a contentious one. Now, before I let you go, Leigh-Anne, probably, tips on best dealing with potential conflict in community schemes, because we also know that there is quite a lot of conflict that tends to arise. Sometimes, I know, for example, instances where a partner of mine was saying that in one of their properties, they always get, the owner living above their tenant's unit always complains about noise, and they're on the ground unit, and it could be the smallest thing, your TV's on and it's not even on loud, and then they're complaining just because they can hear it. If you have a friend over and you're talking, you're not even loud, and then they complain. So what are some of the best ways that we can manage conflict in community schemes?
Yes, as a managing agent, I deal with it on a daily basis, complaints regarding noise, the dog barking the whole day and night, smoking, how the smoke sort of penetrates another unit, parking in another person's bay, whether by accident or not. So generally, a lot of body corporates or homeowners associations will have a dispute resolution process in terms of their rules or their constitution, whereby, let's say me and you we're neighbors, and your dog was barking for the entire night and I wasn't happy about it, and it kept me up, and now I want to do something about it. So I would firstly approach if I was a tenant or the owner, approach the managing agent, and then I would say, listen, I'd like to raise this complaint. Please, can you inform the owner that this is not acceptable, or the like, which the managing agent will then do. They'll write a letter, or they'll pick up the phone and listen, if you do it again, there'll be consequences in terms of the conduct rules. You can only follow what's in the rules. So if the rule says a warning, then a fine, that's the step to take. So if it happens again within a week or 2 weeks, the dog's barking again, then I would inform the managing agent once more, listen, it's still continuing, what are you going to do about it? And the next step would be a fine, if in terms of the rules it's a breach. If it's continuous and there's no on part of the offending party to reduce the noise or do something about it, usually you can then approach what's called the Community Schemes Ombuds Service, which is the ombudsman that was created in 2016 to deal with dispute resolution in community schemes. Prior to that, you could, well, even now you can approach court to for a damages claim or whatever the case may be. But the CSOS for me is the most obvious choice at the moment because it's also a cheaper service. I think to file at the moment, I might be wrong, but it's about 150 Rand to file a dispute, an application for dispute resolution, and follow the process. So I just think the first step is always to approach your portfolio manager or managing agent that you have a complaint and follow the process in terms of the conduct rules or constitution of the community scheme.
We've got a question here coming through from YouTube. It is from Utsepo Mokobudi, who asks, let's say your tenant or visitor breaks the rule of the complex or estate and is fined. Who is liable for the payment?
So because the owner is an owner by virtue of ownership is bound by the conduct rules, every act or breach of a conduct rule is attributable to the owner. So let's say I'm the tenant and I break a rule of noise after midnight. We had a massive party and we disturbed a few of our neighbors. Yes, the tenant broke the rule, but the landlord is ultimately responsible for that tenant. So the managing agent would fine the owner, and the owner then has they could fine the tenant or they could pay it themselves. But ultimately the owner will be the one that will receive the fine, whether by their levy account or a separate bill for the fine, and they will ultimately be responsible to pay that fine.
Well, I think before I let you go, Leigh-Anne, any final tips, whether to renters or potential home buyers, or perhaps people who are already home buyers when it comes to living in a community scheme?
One thing I think I picked up on, which is it's usually an issue, if you look at a scheme of 10 units versus a scheme of 100 units, both parties have the same security guard 24 hours a day. Now, the scheme of 10 units has to pay 30K a month. The scheme of 100 units also has to pay 30K a month for that guard. Now, if you look at the difference in levies, the 100 unit scheme will pay less for that guard in terms of how much per the contribution per owner, whereas the 10 unit will pay more. That also influences your levies. So when looking at buying, always look at how big the scheme is and what your current expenses are, because that will influence your levies. Your levies will never be reduced if you're a smaller scheme, but you have the same expenses as a bigger scheme. So that's something to take into consideration as well.
And that's a great note to end on. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Oh, thanks so much, Zama. It was lovely.
And that is Leigh-Anne Harrison, who's a portfolio manager at Pam Golding Property Management Services. We're going to go for a quick break. When we come back, we will be going through tonight's 5 questions for, of course, the questions for the Champions competition that we're running across our social media platforms. I'll tell you a little bit more about it just after this. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. Well, it's that time of the evening where we go through this evening's questions for the champions. Now, if you still don't know about this great competition that we're running, we're asking you at home to get 4 of your friends or family members and to form a team of 5. Give yourselves a unique name so that you're able to make yourselves known. Make sure that you tune into the Private Property Podcast every weekday at 7 o'clock. And of course, when you're tuning in during the live, let yourselves be known. Do certainly check in so that we know that your team is in fact watching us live. And then of course, you're going to wait until the very end of the podcast, which is right now, where we get to ask you 5 simple questions based on yesterday's episode. The team that gets the first correct answers, so the first 5 answers correct, walks away with 1,500 rands. It's that simple. Get your friends to come on. Let us know what your team name is. All of you must say, I'm from Team Pirates, Team Chiefs, Team Sundowns, and we're watching live. And when you answer the question, and this is a very important one, also share the name of your team. So if you're Team Pirates and we ask you a question, and let's say the answer of the question is number 2, then you must say number 2, #Team Pirates, so that we're able to verify, which team answered all the questions on time. The big thing to note about this one is that we're going to be announcing the winners the following day. That's just so that we verify that all team members were in fact watching us live, and also to verify which team sent all the answers on time. So we want to make sure that we get all our ducks in a row so you can get to walk away with that cash prize. It's that simple. I'm sure you get the gist of it. You certainly want to make sure that you walk away with as much money as you can during this festive season. And that's something that I'm sure a lot of us want. Now, to get started, I'll be asking 5 questions, and they're based on yesterday's episode. And that's, of course, the episode that was with Michelle Dickens, who's the Managing Director of TPN Credit Bureau. And the first question based on yesterday's episode is, paying your debt on time will not have a negative impact on your credit score, true or false? So that's paying your debt on time will not have a negative impact on your credit score. So all you have to do is answer true or false, and of course, # the name of your team, and you're going to potentially stand a chance of walking away with that 1,500 rands. All of you have to answer 5 questions correctly, or rather we have to have 5 correct answers from your team. So you don't all have to answer at the same time. You can choose one person who's the one who types the answers for us. And you're going to be like, this is from our team, but all of you do have to be watching us live in order to stand a chance of winning. The second question here is, you can get 3 free credit reports per annum from any credit bureau, true or false? So you can get 3 free credit reports from any credit bureau per annum, true or false? Remember to share your answer down here below with the #, the name of the team that you are in, so that we're able to track those great answers and stand a chance of walking away with that cash prize. And in the event where we don't somehow get a winner, this money is just going to keep rolling over and rolling over. So you want to make sure that you get it as quickly as you can and you don't miss out. So do make sure that you and your team are sharp. You watch the previous day's episode, and when you tune into this to tonight's episode, or certainly the other nights that are coming along, that you are alert and you're ready to answer those questions. I did say they're going to be easy. And if you're watching yesterday's, these are a walk in the park. And the third one is, TPN does not just look at your credit bureau information, but they additionally supplement it with the transactional data that they have on you, true or false? So I'll repeat that one. It says TPN does not just look at your credit bureau information, but they additionally supplement it with the transactional data that they have on file, on you, true or false. So you can see these questions are easy. I did say it's a festive season and it is a season of giving. So we're not going to make it hard. I think we've had enough hardships this year. So we want to give away this money. Like I said, we have up to 100,000 rands to give away during this festive season. So you want to make sure that you get your hands on some of that money. And it's so easy to win, whether it's on our social media platforms or certainly, of course, by making sure that you watch the Private Property Podcast. Now, for the fourth one, it takes 1 year for the Credit Bureau to remove judgment against your name once the date is settled. True or false? And I'm going to repeat that one. It takes 1 year for the Credit Bureau to remove judgment against your name once the date is settled, once the debt rather is settled. True or false? Again, it's very simple. Make sure your team members are watching. All of you are watching. Whoever answers, it's fine. Make sure you use the hashtag of your team name so that we know how to track it and make sure that we give the points to the right team. The team that scores the highest points is going to be the team that walks away with that 1,500 rands. It really is that simple. So you want to make sure that you're tuned in and ready to win that cash prize. And the last one is you can get your credit score from the nearest police station. True or false? So you can get your credit score from the nearest police station. True or false? So winning across our social media platforms is literally that simple. You watch the Private Property Podcast, get 4 friends or family members to be part of your team. Give yourselves a unique name. I mean, I've already been making examples with Chiefs and Pirates and Sundowns. Don't choose that because I think too many people might actually choose that one. And make sure you're watching us live. All the questions for this competition are going to be based on the previous night's episode, just like tonight's questions were based on last night's episode. And we're going to be announcing who the winners are tomorrow evening. So it's very important for you to bear that in mind. We're certainly excited to give away this cash prize every single day, except on public holidays. And of course, over the weekend, because we don't have the Private Property Podcast, we're going to be giving money away. So you certainly want to make sure that you can almost budget this, you get your friends to watch and you're like, listen, this is money that we want. Let's just watch this thing. Let's make sure that we pay attention. The questions are easy enough and you'll be able to get the prize. So fastest fingers certainly wins the prize. Correct answers, of course, and all the best to all of you. I certainly look forward to seeing you faces on as you get your friends and family to watch the Private Property Podcast and really get them part of our great community. We do this every night at 7 o'clock. Let's see how we can make the circle bigger and also, of course, help them along their property journey. Well, that's a wrap from me, Zama here on the Private Property Podcast, as well as the rest of the team. We are back on your screens tomorrow, rather on Thursday. See, I keep forgetting because tomorrow's a public holiday, it's the 16th. So we're not going to be live on the 16th. And so we're going to be back on the 17th. Am I getting my dates correct? Today is, in fact, the 15th, right? So we're going to be back on your screens on the 17th. So that's after the public holiday. And that's when we'll also be able to announce the winner. And the questions on the 17th are going to be based on tonight's episode. So if you weren't very ready, make sure you watch tonight's episode, get your friends and family to watch tonight's episode. But then, of course, on Thursday, you must all join in order to stand a chance of walking away with that 1,500 rands. Well, this evening, I do not leave you alone. Of course, at 8 o'clock, you can tune into Building Stronger Homes with PPC. That is a great web series that we are running. We're very excited about it. We've been working on it for quite a bit. And now that it's finally ready, we certainly want to make sure that we make your home ownership journey as seamless as possible. And also, of course, those who already own homes, there's so many things that we like doing with our homes. So in the event where you might perhaps have a remodeling that's going to be coming up, that's one of the things that you want to be mindful of. And this evening, the topic is a checklist, save time with home developments or renovation projects. And I had a great conversation there with the technical rep from PPC, Rowan Haynes, who really was great in better explaining some of the things that we always need to be very aware of when it comes to whether it's a home renovation project or you're building your home from scratch. So do make sure that you tune into Building Stronger Homes, a special web series brought to you by PPC. Well, that's a wrap from us. Do hope that you're going to have a fantastic evening. Do tune into that show at 8 p.m. and I'll be back on Thursday, hoping you're going to enjoy tomorrow and stay safe.
Hi, I'm Clifton Smithers. I live in Ballito, where my partners and I run a business called Union 3. As a family, we chose to move here about 6 years ago. What attracted us to the area was the safe and relaxed lifestyle of the North Coast. We're surrounded by so much natural beauty, and we love that it's so casual. It's just not as intense as a busy city. In fact, that's one of the main reasons there's so many people moving into the area. There's some amazing lifestyle estates out here. We've got St. Barley, Brettonwood Estate, and Zimbiti, to name a few. The Ballito Lifestyle Centre caters to everyone's needs. There's also some smaller commercial centres like Tiffany's and Salt Rock. There's some excellent restaurants to choose from, and there's a really wide variety of activities on offer. From mountain biking out on the trails to surfing at any one of the beaches, there really is something for everyone. This quiet little town really comes alive over the weekend. The live concerts in the farmers market at the Lychee Orchard is very popular. With the new international airport just 15 minutes down the road and the unmatched lifestyle that this place offers, it's no wonder that the North Coast is the fastest growing town in South Africa. My family and I absolutely love each other, and this is our neighborhood.